Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. It's time to review Malcolm and Marie, directed by Sam Levinson, starring Zendaya and John David Washington. We're going to talk about the movie without spoilers for a few minutes, and then we want to do a spoiler discussion really bad, so we are gonna, we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into this film and dig around and see what's inside, because this is a real conversation starter, for better or worse. The film is basically about this long argument that a couple has after the man forgets to thank his partner during a speech at the premiere of his latest movie. A lot of people have been talking about, if you thought the argument scene in Marriage Story was a lot, the whole movie is kind of like that. The film is basically just showing a couple who is unleashing all the ammunition, and the argument reveals deeper layers of their relationship that have been boiling beneath the surface for a while. I think what the film does well is it simulates an argument that at times I think is realistic between a couple. I found the writing to be mostly very strong in this film. It is not necessarily the most realistic dialogue because the characters are much more clever than we usually are in real life, but I think that what comes out of them feels like a better crafted version of some realistic thoughts. But even if there are hiccups in the writing here and there, I think that John David Washington and Zendaya are really gluing this entire thing together. Watching them dig at each other, it can be hard to sort of decipher what in their relationship is compelling them to stay, other than an unhealthy codependence. And I think that maybe the movie could have tried a little bit to show, the highs to some extent. But I think it's always fascinating to watch a couple who seems to know each other so well that they know all the buttons to push. There's definitely a big psychological warfare going on here. And so for me, that was very engaging. I'm kind of conflicted. I'm very in the middle. On one hand, I really don't mind a film that is about an argumentation. If that's what the film wants to do, you want to make it about one long argument, that's cool. I'm down to see what that film is going to be like. And I was engaged the whole way through. I was entertained by that. That's definitely enough to sustain a film for me. But at the same time, writing arguments can be a little bit of a crutch that inexperienced writers even will use to tell their stories, because I feel like everybody has to be kind of arguing all the time. And I don't know if this is actually the best way to get deep into the characters, because oftentimes I really didn't know if I was looking into a hollow shell at the middle of this film. I think this hollow shell might be Zendaya's character. There were a lot of times when John David Washington would say something very mean and cruel to her, and all she could say is fuck you. Why else would somebody say fuck you except if it's kind of true and it stings a little bit? But the things he would say is you're just a support dog. He called her a support animal at one point, and she couldn't really argue back at it, because ultimately I think there's some awareness that this character kind of is a support dog for him. I didn't have an easy time separating the male character from the actual filmmaker and writer, and I kept seeing the female character as being kind of a projection of how he would view somebody he's in a relationship with. And it felt a little weird to me. I'm going to go into more detail on what I mean by that, and we can debate a little bit during spoilers. I'm just going to wrap up my feelings about the movie, and then I think we can get into the good stuff. I really dug both the lead performances. I think some people are going to think that John David Washington is over the top, but I actually kind of reveled in seeing him loosen up.
Oh, I didn't think he was over the top. I thought he was actually so much better than I've ever seen him here.
With Tenet and even BlacKkKlansman, where I liked him, I think here he felt so much more playful. I literally feel like I'm watching him improve as an actor in this role. And Zendaya is really excellent in this film. They make me completely transfixed to the story at all points. There might be something in it that's a little too hollow for me.
I think it was fun to watch it. And I liked seeing this kind of experimentation of just making this about a couple's argument and seeing kind of what happens or how well it works. I've also had a fun, interesting time trying to separate the artist from this piece of work, as the movie insists we should do. It's made me look at that debate in a very interesting way, but almost unintentionally so. I'm going to probably give it a 5 or 6, but I'm going to decide at the end of this review what it actually is.
We're going to be on our edge of our toes to watch. I'm more around a 7 on this one. I definitely liked it. I'm interested in it. Let's get into the good stuff. So what's holding you up here, buddy?
All right. So, we'll have a little therapy session here. So I took notes during this movie. I was very interested in it. There were a lot of arguments happening, right? So I'm trying to follow step by step. It's hard to pick up on what concretely is being said about one another sometimes, because in the heat of the moment, I think the insults can kind of take over and just be a little bit of like sensory or emotional overload. And that will dazzle a lot of people. But I tried to go a little bit deeper than that and kind of keep track of what people were saying in this movie. So my takeaway is that Zendaya's character can very clearly be understood of wanting appreciation from John David Washington. From the second the movie starts, she is upset that he did not thank her at the speech. And the rest of the movie is sort of like her asking for appreciation. Like, why can't you thank me for being what I'm being for you?
And the movie ends on that too.
Exactly.
That's like right where it ends.
That is the core of her character. It's very clear to me. And because she doesn't have like this dream of her own, or it got lost somewhere, she feels like the only way that her story can be told is through him. That is also something that she says. He's the only one that can tell her story. He's the only thing that can understand her. He's really what can bring her to life, but she also sees herself as having this role in his life. Oh, I can bring this egomaniac down to earth. I can ground him a little bit and make him into a better man. And all I'm asking for in return is that he thanks me and appreciates me for it. And I find this character like a little strange.
Yeah.
Especially given that, yeah, there's like a gender thing in here of she is being supported by him. She wants things from him that only he can give to her. In a way, she did contribute to this masterpiece that he made, and she is the reason for that. So he does owe a lot to her. But at the same time, he is somebody who is more independent. I think he's more independent. And I think the movie may be trying to make a point about codependency and that they're kind of equal, but that doesn't really play out, I think. He's the one with the career, and he's the one that ultimately, like, he can find his muse elsewhere. Very much a story of an artist and his muse. And to me, I could not unhear the writer-director's voice coming through that character and their perceptions on women being projected onto Zendaya's character.
I definitely found the balance a little uneven here, because it feels like Zendaya's character, what she wants, as we said, is she wants to be appreciated, to serve Malcolm.
Right.
And
literally gives him mac and cheese and stuff like that. And she says, like, if only this man could have someone to make him breakfast and give him blowjobs. There's so many lines that are more explicit than I even thought it would go towards with that, with her serving him.
Yeah, and then he eats up the mac and cheese like a complete, like, oh,
buffoon.
Doesn't say thank you. And obviously this is a toxic relationship. It's not saying that the director views women as being in like these lesser roles or these servant roles. Like, this relationship read as being very toxic. And so in some ways it could be viewed as an interesting portrait of a toxic relationship. But at the same time, because it's the artist and his muse sort of trope, I wonder if it funnels a little too easily into something kind of neat that we've seen before. And the fact that John David Washington kind of uses Zendaya's character and tries to put it into his art. And then there's a whole aspect of his character where he's like unwilling to look within himself to sort of confront whatever's going on in there. And we see him deflecting and projecting onto her, like trying to tear her down. I feel like that character had a little more going for them in terms of substance. And it was a little disappointing to arrive at the conclusion that Zendaya's character, all she wants is just to kind of please him.
The unacceptable way that he is and the way that he takes out his emotions onto her. Ultimately, I think it's a little bit forgiven in the film, because he does have to give her more appreciation by the end. That's what he learns. But he doesn't have to like transform kind of the way that he is. That actually seemed like really a problem. There were times when I was very disgusted with him.
I wondered if the end wanted us to feel hopeful for their relationship moving forward, or if it wanted us to feel hopeless for the relationship, seeing that it would probably just continue in this same cycle. Or is the movie suggesting that the argument kind of unearthed all the shit that was underneath the surface, and at least now they know the shit's there, like at least now they understand what their relationship really is, and maybe they can kind of live with it better. Maybe it's saying
I think it's actually it's D. It's all of the above. And I like that about it, because on one hand, it does give you a lot of room to see this relationship however you will. A lot of people will say this is a toxic relationship. I think the movie invites that interpretation. It also invites people to say there are lots of problems in this relationship, but these two are meant for each other. And that's kind of up to you, which I respect about the film. It doesn't have to tell you what to think.
Like Phantom Thread was about that.
Exactly.
But Phantom Thread, it was like, oh, like.
But that was
that
about
was,
control.
Yeah.
See, like the woman was presented as somebody who really was striving for control. That was a more human trait than this one. Everybody is trying to control in this movie, but it wasn't quite as strong in that direction. It was more like I'm trying to serve.
It felt like John David Washington, when he's airing out his laundry to her, he's like genuinely like really trying to hurt her.
Yeah.
He's trying to break her down. And to some extent, that is a testament to how close they are, that like they can be this angry at each other. At the same time, she genuinely seemed to be trying to get him to realize something that would actually make him a better person. But him, on the other hand, he like really was actually trying to just like hurt her and put in negative thoughts into her head about the relationship.
And also, I don't think that's something that's going to change about him, or that the movie even suggests is going to change about him. She points it out to him very clearly, like, you are cruel, needlessly so. I don't do this to you. That's not something I think she's going to change about him, which is weird because, again, like you said, the movie kind of goes on and it leaves you wondering like where this relationship is going to take them. But I mean, if this was my friend, I would say without a doubt, like this is a terrible person to be in a relationship with.
At the same time, Marie is someone who has like, you know, I guess low self-esteem problems.
Oh yeah.
As a recovered addict, she never really recovered from those like.
Oh, there's no subtlety
issues.
Here. I mean, he literally says, and this part is where I don't like some of the writing. He says like, you're damaged. I'm yelling at you because you like being treated like you're damaged.
And she owned it by quietly smiling.
Exactly. She did not counter that point. It was sort of this quiet acceptance, like, yeah, I guess that's true. And I was like, I don't like that. I don't like that she is so broken that he's allowed to kind of attack her in this way. And it's almost like it's because she invites him to attack her that way that he's allowed to do it. I thought that was wrong. Does anybody in life actually invite people to attack them like that and likes it? I think that's weird.
I mean, there are definitely people that have, you know, the self-fulfilling prophecy where they don't like themselves and then they invite, you know, negative surroundings or whatever, or people who are toxic in their lives. Like,
this was just a weird way to say that, though.
It was a little bit of a weird way to say it. I feel very conflicted about a lot of the things, but at the same time, there's something about them that makes me want to dive deeper. I'm kind of interested in the movie, but the ultimate like takeaways of it, like if I am I supposed to take away, wow, look at this toxic relationship? Or I don't know. That's not that profound of a statement for me.
I don't know what the statement really is. I think another part of the writing that I wasn't a huge fan of, both the characters are obviously like very flawed. And the problem I have with John David Washington's character's flaws is that I think it's very easy to write a character that's like, oh, their ego is too big. They're too much of an asshole. I actually think for assholes, it's easy to see yourself in that way and say, I'm an asshole. It actually gives you an excuse to behave badly and be an asshole. That is like kind of as deep as we get with this character. He's not presented as insecure necessarily. It's just that he has lots of loud opinions and he's kind of a jerk about it. And that's just how he is.
He has walls up too.
There's the walls up thing too. It's also that he doesn't see himself as being very interesting because he's sort of privileged and he wants to deflect a little bit away from that. As an artist, he knows he is not as interesting as somebody who has actually like overcome a lot of adversity in his life. And so that's why he attaches on to people like her. I feel like that character, insofar as it is the writer-director, is not a very deep introspection. It's not that deep of a look at yourself. It's really not that hard to look at yourself and say, I'm an asshole. Yeah, that's me. I want to give like the most charitable interpretation of the movie. And I think that would probably be that these are two people who are presented as very damaged, who were supposed to take away our damage. Like, I'm not going to assume that the director or writer is unaware that there's a little bit of abuse going on in a toxic relationship, both contributing in their own way to this like poison. That would be my most charitable interpretation of what I'm seeing here. And it still doesn't really excuse the fact that I think the woman character is like a little vapidly written and it seems like she's male gazy. But this really leads into an interesting point because there's a meta commentary going on here. And the fact that I've been even mentioning the director and the fact that the director is a male in my critique of this movie is something the movie itself comments on and does not want me to do. So there's a giant rant where John David Washington says, these film journalists are looking at my movie through the lens of this is being made by a black male. And therefore, when we see this trope, they're either subverting it or they're leaning into it. For example, if this movie was written by a woman, I might say the woman is subverting that trope of like the helpless woman because they're a woman and they have a character in the movie who's very needy. Therefore, they're taking a trope that we see in male films and they're subverting it because they're a woman. Like that is a reading that one might do through this lens of identity when we look at the identity of the filmmaker. And this character is very critical of that. He says his films should be looked at like any film. You don't need to compare it necessarily to black made films or white led films. It's just a film about humans and emotion and whatever. And of course, Zendaya does have some counterpoints to this, but his rant goes on like much longer than hers does. I mean, she brings up a little bit about how maybe he has a male gaze.
Yeah, it feels like
he's not really able to counter that entirely, but it does lean towards like this heavy criticism of that whole lens of how journalists look at films.
It definitely feels like it wants you to agree with the rant. And sometimes the rant's funny and like kind of accurate.
Yeah, the rant's a little accurate.
Film critics are looking to like flex their woke muscles and their liberal arts education. Often they'll look to the identity of the filmmaker to try to make these points instead of looking at the substance of the film. Within the point that this is trying to make here, we have a black character written by a white man saying that white film critics are misjudging his black art. And some people have a problem with this where they say, it's weird that Sam Levinson, as a white man, is using a black character as a mouthpiece to voice his frustrations. Like it absolves him of criticism because a black person saying it. But at the same time, because the movie made that point, if you say that criticism, you are missing the point of the movie in a way. So it's like, I almost wonder if he should have even gone this route because he creates a situation where he can avoid criticism for that very scene.
Sam Levinson also has not said, like, I agree wholeheartedly with this rant. Like, it's maybe a part of what he thinks, but he may also not totally agree with it. I don't really know where I fall on this because I agree. It's weird to put in that kind of deflection. And it does make you question to what extent is that kind of criticism valid? Because there is an extent to which it's valid. If you think about the extreme of that, filmmakers forever have been like majority male. And the way that we've seen women depicted on screen is through a male gaze because men have been creating movies. It's just that's a very obvious thing that everybody can understand and agree with. So to some extent, the identity of the filmmaker has mattered and does continue to matter in what they choose to present and how they present it on the screen. And he even acknowledges, says like, well, of course, my films would have been different if I was a woman because I'd just be a different person. Like his worldview would be completely different. So there's an acknowledgement that that is true. And I don't try to look at films through like, well, a man made it, so like they're presenting something this way. But I felt like the way that this woman character was written forced me to consider whether she is a sort of creation of a man in like the writing of a man. There's even a line that spoke to me on a meta level where she says, no one can really write me except you. And I thought, yeah, no one really could write this character except for a man. Again, like, I don't know if I'm falling prey to this kind of petty film journalism thing, or if this is actually a valid way to look at this movie. It's making me question that, but at the same time, I think that's sometimes valid.
To some extent, we should look at films as if we don't know who's making it. And if you are over-reliant as a critic on attacking the identity of the filmmaker, you're probably missing the substance of the film, or you're using their identity as a crutch to support your points. At the same time, I wouldn't take that argument to its logical extreme and say that identity of the filmmaker doesn't matter, for example. If there was a movie about characters who use blackface, like, I would want to know if the director was white or black.
But also, regardless of whether they are white or black, you might say that felt really freaking racist in that movie.
But then I wonder where it applies to Malcolm's character, and I think that maybe the reason that he's so passionate about this is because he doesn't want people to looking at him because he has nothing interesting to say. He wants to be appreciated for the work of art that's on screen, which comes from Marie's experience, but he doesn't want them finding out like where his source of inspiration comes from. So in that way, I actually like the film criticism rant because it does tie into the character.
Overall, I thought this was a really interesting film because it inspired all of these thoughts and this dialogue inside my own head. I do land in the middle though, because I agree with the points that I made about the characters being very unbalanced on the line of like gender. But overall, I enjoyed watching it. I would definitely recommend other people check it out.
There was some part of the writing that I liked where it felt like it was willing to go to really dark places and have the characters, be cruel to each other. Everybody knows the feeling of, oh, I could say something that would like hurt you right now. Like I have things that I can say to you, but they don't bring it up. And this movie kind of being willing to bring it up is something that I think makes it kind of interesting to watch. The actors did a good job kind of making me believe that these people were acting out of their worst impulses. I think there's a lot of interesting topics to be discussed here. Although some people are just screaming about how the dialogue is so horrendously bad, they can't even pay attention to anything else. I guess we were able to not have that issue, and I could see some interesting avenues in this film. I think they might have led to some places that were a little more hollow than I was hoping, but I still honestly like the writing, really like the performances, and it did give me a lot to think about. So I definitely am glad that I watched it. I think Zendaya maybe can get an Oscar nomination, but I'm not sure if we're feeling that. I feel like the discussion around the film is so hot.
I don't think she'll end up with a nomination personally. I think she might get a Critics' Choice, and we'll see by the time this video's out. But she and John David Washington are great in this. John David Washington is better than I've ever seen him. Cinematography wise, yeah, this was pretty good. And the directing in it, I especially really like that one scene in the beginning with the really long take.
Yeah.
I was appreciating that style and how dynamic the camera movement was.
Yeah, I mean, for this being like an argument movie the whole time with two characters, it was really well directed. I thought visually, like the cinematography was great.
I'm going to give it a 5 because I think the movie doesn't know exactly how it's being sometimes. I still liked it. It's weird.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Who do you scream at?